Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast that is still yet to be named, where we talk about AI things that are interesting us and new things, old things, and how AI is shaping the world ahead. On this call, we have the lovely David, who is a CEO and tech business entrepreneur who likes new stuff and driving AI development in his own business. I also have on this call beautiful Adrian, who's an entrepreneur, lawyer turned serial founder and operator working with organizations solving structural problems for people and the planet to thrive, and a non-technical technophile. That's a very difficult thing for me to say. Lastly, we have the wonderful Greg, co-founder of Memrise, former chief data scientist at Channel 4. Wow, very impressive. Co-founder of Rehearsable.ai and rogue AI strategist at Greg Detra Consulting Limited. I hope I pronounced that properly. And also myself, I'm Lizzie. I am the CEO and founder of Wombat, which is an AI tech platform. I also do AI consulting. I'm 6 months pregnant, and I'm an unapologetic vibe coder. Today, I'd like to kick off the conversation about something that has been buzzing at least around my mind, which is how, when we're using tools like Cursor, VibeCoding, me and Adrian are the non-technical guys, David and Greg are the definitely more technical guys. How are we getting buy-in from teams, and how are we using Cursor in general to level up our skills? So,
well, I feel like despite it being directed maybe at teams, maybe I'll jump in as a non-technical technophile who's perhaps at the beginning of the journey with using AI coding assistants and agents like Cursor. I'm pretty much learning as I go and just trying to find my way through. Often you see things, so much commentary out there on the internet and in various groups with lots of technical people about maybe what best practices or what people's opinions are. And sometimes it can feel quite daunting getting stuck into all of that. But an approach that I've found that's worked quite well is just starting with small things that are fairly limited and just playing around with the tooling and Cursor. And I feel like tying in things like Perplexity to just have any question that I have, just firing it off at Perplexity and getting a response back with leads to sources so that I can keep on developing that learning and understanding definitely helps get stuck into it. So it's been a really useful journey to just go through it, make lots of mistakes and find lots of things are broken, but then trying to understand why, and then going back and then seeing that they work. Yeah,
cool. And I suppose that I think that exact style of just trying things out, I think, has been really important to our team as well. Like I've seen there's some people in our team and they're absolutely awesome. They've always wanted to progress when it comes to their coding skills, but never had either, to be honest, the time put aside for them, and that comes down to management, really bad management by people like me, or the kind of just the knowledge in a small organization to be able to learn off other people. And I think for a couple of my team, there's about 30 of us in our business, but for a couple of them, I've seen now them develop actually internal tooling now in a way that we would never have ever imagined was possible, where we now have internal systems that do things that were just annoying people day to day. So I've seen from first hand, like how just giving them a tool that is basically your assistant, and they know how the technical support works, but they don't actually know how they didn't know how software development works. It's been able to help them bridge that gap, and it's been absolutely amazing seeing people who aren't software developers just kind of reporting back with little videos internally saying, hey, we've got this new little tool that restarts servers and resets instances and that kind of thing. That is absolutely mind-blowing. We've never, as a small business, we've never been able to do those internal tools to make us operate much more efficiently, and now just by having something like Cursor, it's given us the ability to do that kind of thing.
And I love what you just said there, David. I almost reminded me of my AI projects list might as well be called "What is really bugging me."
Yeah.
And that's basically it. Is, oh, that's really bugging me. Should I have a go at that?
Yeah, no, it's true. But all of those things that you put to one side and just say, oh, why do we do this every day? And and I think Greg mentioned earlier, just before the call, that it was about like doing those kind of greenfield projects and that kind of thing of being able to like get people working on kind of low risk items effectively. And I think that's been an absolute breath of fresh air within our business, and seeing people like just, and I think it brings this spirit of creativity back to the business as well, in a way that you've got random people on the, just sending a video of something they've done, and another random person, I don't think they're trying to outdo each other. I think they're actually positively be inspired by each other, like just developing stuff that's really helping the business. And it's quite exciting as well. It makes the whole business feel a lot more dynamic and a lot quicker, and like we're actually improving publicly to each other at any rate, which I think has been really great.
That's really interesting, because for me personally, I love exploring kind of any kind of new tech. I've always been someone who loves gadgets, but I do see that there's the other side of that, people who are a little more resistant to this technology, who have their own reservations, are more conservative about using this stuff. So how are you guys managing to inspire your teams to move forward with this?
I suppose there are maybe two angles you could take. If you're thinking about people who are hesitant, it might be worth starting with a conversation about feelings. And I usually start with the positive. So, okay, if this were to work really magnificently, how would that feel? What would that enable? But also to have a conversation about what's most concerning. And we all have fears. We have fears that the thing is going to write terrible code and then we're going to be on the hook. We have bigger fears about what it might mean for our jobs or the environment. And talking those through, and then at least opening up the possibility of addressing some of them, I think gets over a lot of barriers that would otherwise be blocking us invisibly. I think having had that conversation, then you need to move past it. And the Santeksu Perry, a famous AI strategist, talks about how if you want to build a ship, don't drum up the people to gather wood and divide the work and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the end of sea. And one way of giving people a vision of the end of sea might be, as you say, to start with a side project or a hackathon, or even, as you say, automated tests as a gateway drug, but basically give people a sense of what it's like to fly. Give people just a sense of that abandon, of making progress faster than you thought possible, with all of the boring bits just smoothed away. And that's so intoxicating that if you can have even one moment like that in the first session, then you probably got people at least interested.
The other way as well, if the opposite of that, Greg, is if you don't do that. Because if you don't do that, then what happens is I've had this before as well. I've had this within the team where they, they've heard rumblings that we're going to be implementing Cursor and that kind of thing, and it's fantastic. So they downloaded it early, and that's fine. Look, I love that. I love them trying it all. But I think sometimes, you can get team members wanting it to fail as well, to be honest. So sometimes what happens is they will try it on a really difficult to solve bug, for example, which it is more challenging to use. So just so everyone's aware, like new projects in Cursor, getting cracking on those, the amount of uplift you can see in terms of productivity is insane, right? So it will do like what appears to be 10 days work, it could do in half an hour with you, right? That's a general feel that you could get out of it. But then trying the opposite of that is trying it on and trying to utilize it well on a very difficult to solve bug that requires a deep level understanding of the software architecture, maybe the virtual machine infrastructure or whatever it may be. And to be honest, without the correct level of prompting, without the correct level of context, the AI hasn't got a chance. So trying it on something like that and seeing it fail is very possible as well. So I think actually what Greg, you were saying there in trying on a greenfield project is great, seeing the big result and knowing, but I think when it gets to the higher level stuff, it takes a bigger degree of coaching. Like you have to really understand, what does the AI need to know to try and solve this? How can it help you rather than do it for you? So I think actually when you're getting those higher level bugs, it's more about being like a dance partner on getting this thing nailed than it is about doing it all for you, which it does feel like on those greenfield projects, it can be like. So I think actually the right level of support to the developers as they're getting in is really important, depending on what they're trying to, what you're trying to achieve as a business.
Lizzie, do you want to tell the others about the Sherlock Holmes mode? Because you told me about this recently and I've been using it and it's great.
So this is actually something that I tried out. This is something that the AI adopted itself a few weeks ago after I was trying to solve this bug. I kept asking it to investigate, and it assumed the persona of Sherlock Holmes just randomly, and started calling me Watson and started adjusting its hat and all crazy things. I found very funny at the time, but actually I started using that in some prompts, especially when I found like there was a very big bug or there was just something that Cursor just couldn't get its head around to fix. And that was, you are now the Sherlock Holmes of AI. You need to find the core issue associated with this problem that's causing this problem by deducing it and speak out loud. And it has just been quite a game changer for me, just actually having that as a prompt. Yeah, it really thinks it through, and it could just be that it's deducing, and that maybe that's the secret source, but it's been able to identify some core issues just assuming that Sherlock Holmes persona.
Good. What, Karen?
I was just going to say, it was when you talked about a dance partner, David, that was what triggered that memory. That I think once you start to think like pair programming, that there's a give and take, that we adopt different roles, different conversational modes. And Lizzie, you've described a kind of information gathering, hypothesis, confirmation, scientist detective mode. And I definitely find that valuable when I'm debugging or just trying to figure out what could possibly be going on. I think there's a planning mode where we're like, okay, let's try and do this complicated thing. Like, what are all of our options? What are the trade-offs? Make a proposal, ask me questions, but for God's sake, don't start typing yet. And then there's a sort of write the tests first, let's figure out what the edge cases are, and then you can go and write the code afterwards. And so these different modes have different interaction styles and occur at different points in the project. And I think intuitively, we all know which mode we're in, but there's something helpful about explicitly suggesting them and even defining them as custom rules or whatever.
I think there's actually something like you can tell this is really immature software when all of us have discovered these little ways of getting more out of it. So you can see in a year's time, there's Lizzie, your Sherlock Holmes mode is probably going to be a new tab, isn't it? Really, where it's like, right, advanced debugging, go to Sherlock Holmes. But there's also I've got these little tips as well, just little things that I found asking it to draw a diagram for you, is a good way of clearing its head or clearing my head. I can't tell which one it is, to be honest, because it's when you say, for example, the other day we were trying to connect through a server to another server, right, in some sort of SSH thing. And no, by the end of it, everyone was unclear as to how we're connecting to the end server. So in the end, it was like, can you just draw a diagram of where you're going through to connect to the server? And then it drew that diagram. And it was basically, it sorted it out for everyone. It was, oh, you're trying the wrong place. You need to try there. And then, got everything clear. And it after about an hour of we had three of us banging our head against a brick wall after an hour. And after that, it literally took 5 minutes to solve it, basically. So,
that's brilliant. Just concretely, how did you get it to draw the diagram? Because it doesn't have hands.
Oh no, it just does nice little dots. How you always wondered how all of those, when you had one of those MS-DOS programs and someone had just written this amazing thing out of characters, and you always wondered who took the time to do that. That was basically, Cursor just does that really well. So it's draw a nice diagram, just do L. Do you know what I mean? The lines underneath. That was just brilliant. Like I just tried it once and it worked really well that time. So yeah, I've been doing it ever since. Yeah.
That's phenomenal. And it also got me thinking about, I think some of us have previously talked about the levels of empathy and how we might want to treat an AI like the way that I manage the AI in the same or similar ways that we manage our team members. And we, generally speaking, know that we get more success the more empathy we have for the team members, their experience, the context that they have, and filling any gaps. And one of the things that I found really helpful is almost imagining AI as that kind of team member who starts off as like a highly capable, highly driven, highly energized individual. And if I just give them one line and say, do this, they're going to go off potentially in different tangents or freeze or some other behavior that I don't really want. Whereas if I take the time to lay out the context, like, you are Sherlock Holmes, you take on this persona, you have this background, here are some other files that I want you to check out, or you've seen the entire context of us banging our heads against the wall, can you help us, like, can you draw a diagram based on all of that context to help us get more clarity? I find it is really, yeah, amazing.
Something that I don't know if these prompting comes in fashions, but I remember last year it was all the rage to threaten your AI, to say
Never do that.
or bribe it in some way, to say, oh, if you don't do this, then I'm going to lose my job, or if you do this, I'm going to give you a tip of $500, or if you don't do this, they're going to take my cats away. And I used to add that to the end of every prompt just to try and blackmail the AI into doing a good job. Now I don't use it so much because I think it's exactly as you say. It's more about managing, like you're managing a person. You don't want them to do things because of blackmail. You want them to do it because they're informed about what they're doing.
I think, you know, what Greg was saying about the different modes, I think is really important. And actually, you're at the start of the project. Like if you've got something, a blank slate, what you actually want to do is have it done, have the code structure exactly right, best practice, have everything best practice. So at the start of it, if I'm doing something new, I would say something like, you're the best technical architect in the world. And now what I want you to do is to lay out the code structure, draw a diagram of the code structure, and I park that to one side so I can refer back to it, like the perfect code. And I think I do that, like when it comes to, if I'm doing a UI, for example, and I would always say to it, I don't know if it works or not, but I would always say to it, you know, you're the best UI designer in the world. Like, as the best UI designer in the world, what would... So I think that I found, like, I have ended up with good results doing that. Not that I wouldn't have done otherwise, but I think depending on the mode, if you have it live who it is, who you want it to be, because it's indexed the whole internet, you'd have thought that would help. But there we go. Yeah.
I do wonder, like, how that then stacks up. We've got people across various levels of experience on the AI coding journey, non-technical me through to technical you, David and Greg, and Lizzie, with all your experience. I wonder how that then sits with like vibe coding and perhaps not knowing the context. And so for people at the less technical end, there might be like oh, I don't know all of that context. So how, yeah, I know Lizzie, you particularly love vibe coding. So how do you deal with that?
I think it's, at least for me, it's just about, you don't have to know exactly everything. You just need to know how to parrot. It's a little bit like learning a language. That I speak Spanish, but if you ask me why things are like that in this particular grammatical way, or why you say a particular word, I wouldn't be able to answer you. And even in English, if someone asked me why do you say a in the sentence, a lot of the times I wouldn't know why. You just do. So I find that with a lot of this vibe coding, or at least my process, is that I watch a lot of developers doing stuff and building cool stuff with Cursor, and I implement the same things and see if it works for me, but I don't really have the full context on what it's doing. I just look at the end result of, okay, yeah, this worked better, or this felt a little bit smoother working with Cursor, which is...
Can I ask you a question, Lizzie? Yeah. It's because I think you like mentioned your vibe coding quite a lot, but I found that when I've been doing new stuff on it, because it gets stuck on the hard stuff like quite quickly, I found it's actually been like, to be honest, if you know in the Matrix where they plug those things into your brain and then suddenly you know what you're talking about, I found it's a bit like that, because I found that it gets you to the hard part so quickly that you then have to suddenly get really good at the topic to finish the last 1%. And so I know that you're saying I'm thinking you're now a closet coder basically, and you're not like this vibe coder anymore. Like, I'm thinking that actually a hell of a lot more than you did when you started. Do you know what I mean? And it's probably that, and it's just got you to that position way quicker, because I think that it takes you so far that you want to finish it anyway, even if it does mean you have to learn that final 2%. Do you know what I mean?
That's really interesting on that, because I started a course called Join Takeoff run by McKay Wrigley, and to use Cursor, Replit, a bunch of other things. And one of the things that I learned from that was within Cursor rules was just to set up rules for AI, was to set up, you are teaching me as a novice to coding how to use this tool. And I just list out a bunch of ways of being patient, making sure that you provide relevant sources for me to keep on developing my learning, like linking through. And that has been super useful then within Cursor to just within the chat, just be like, what does this mean? And rather than just getting maybe a link to something or a highly technical explanation, getting an explanation that is put way more in my context to be able to understand, learn, and grow. So I've found that super useful.
Yeah.
I do think that Cursor also, you're totally right, David, that Cursor does teach you a lot, and now I can identify when it's going off the rails, whereas before I would have no idea. I'd be like, no, please, not another WebSocket, or please, no, not another Neon database. Even though I don't have a technical eye, I can see that it's starting to diverge into a direction I didn't want it to go into.
That's interesting. What are the signs to you, Lizzie, that it's starting to get stuck in the mud? So you mentioned WebSockets, okay, maybe, but it sounds like there's more of an intuition there.
Yeah. So one of the surefire ways that it's gone off the tracks is if it has, because I use YOLO mode, if it goes past 25 interactions, you know that it's probably decided to go down a rabbit hole somewhere. I also ask it when it's finished to cross-check. So I just say, cross-check your implementation. And then it'll go back through and usually tick. So it'll be like, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. And then if I see, okay, you're going off topic or you're editing files that I've not, because all of the files usually that it makes are quite well named, I know that it should be looking at this, but then it goes, okay, yeah, actually, no, I've made the 9th WebSocket of the day. I'm like, why? There's small things like that where I'm like, okay, yeah, something's gone wrong here. Or I can even ask it. The other day I was debugging, not even for my own project, but for somebody else's project. And they were suspicious that it had multiple databases. And I just asked the database, the code base, how many databases do we have? Like, where are they? Like, what are they doing? Which is the main one? And it was like, yeah, we have 3. And you're like, okay, can we condense that down to 1, maybe, Cursor? Would that be nice? But yeah, again, there could be somebody who's a super duper coder who goes, no, you definitely need to have 3. You need to have 9 WebSockets, and you need to have 16 folders that are client source. And maybe that's how it should be done. But at least for me, I'm like, that doesn't seem quite right. So
I think you probably highlighted like an area that you can go wrong on this as well, because there is, if you're just giving it a task to do and not giving it any guardrails, I can see how you could be left with a mess at the end of it, basically. And it might work, but it won't scale, and you could you'd have to rewrite it at some point. Not to say that I think a lot of people that are building now are also thinking, if I've written it now and I have to rewrite it in a year, the tools are going to be so much better in a year that I'll just be able to plug it into something and it will rewrite it really well. So there's that way of looking at it too. But as someone that would like to make something designed that in a way that it will scale, I do find it a comfort that I know that is a good way of doing it, and that's a bad way of doing it.
I think that's what would frustrate a lot of people who are technical, because you would actually, I presume, then go into the code and be like, what have you made? This is terrible. Whereas I imagine myself looking at Cursor and Cursor looking back at me, and I'm like, I don't know. You fix it. I don't know. And because I keep throwing it back into Cursor, being like, I don't know any more than you. You've got loads of knowledge. You fix it. That eventually, through a lot of bashing my head into the wall, it manages to resolve it. But
yeah, okay.
I guess it reminds me of, I think there are 2 tips for intermediate level Cursor use that have helped me a lot. And they both revolve around this word context. So the first one is, again, a management tip. So if you imagine that Cursor is a little bit like a pretty competent engineer that you've literally just hired, who knows nothing about your company, nothing about your project, and nothing about your code base, except what you explicitly tell it, except If you say, by the way, you might want to read files 1, 2, and 3 because that's probably where the good stuff is. And oh, by the way, here's a document that describes roughly what we're trying to do with some to-do items for today. Give it all that. Honestly, it performs above the level of most developers at the level of many developers I've worked with. And it's so tempting to judge it based on how it does blindfold and be like, oh, it sucks. Whereas if you point it in the right direction, it does very well. And I think the second aspect in which context ends up being key is the context window. So it gets dumber the longer the conversation. And experienced Cursor users almost instinctively start a new conversation every however long. You look at the size of the scroll bar, you're like, oh, better start again. It's about to start getting a bit dementory. And so that then requires a bunch of practices to how you carry context from one conversation to another. But either in both senses, the context and managing how much and what you're loading its short-term memory with ends up being the key to it performing.
Yeah. And I think there's something on top of that as well, as to me, it's never held the architecture particularly, it's never held the structure of how everything's linked together. It knows what's in front of it, it knows the files you tag, but having a concept of the whole thing, it's not been very good at that so far for me. So I've always kept in my back pocket like a notepad of just what the software architecture is that I can refer back to, or just the general basics. I built something I was trying to lead by the front and building something quite complicated in our business, because they know that I haven't been coding in years, and if I can do it, those guys, they should be able to do it. So I took the most difficult project on in the business just because I wanted to show the really experienced developers that, you know, even I can do it basically. And I did like see where experienced developers would struggle, but I managed to mitigate it with kind of those little tips of keeping text documents of the software architecture of the stuff that I've done, so I could always refer back to it. And it worked really actually in the end. And it meant that I also had, the great thing was that because I was doing that, I also had pre-written documentation for what I just developed as well. It was amazing. So then I could hand it over to, here's the software, here's the documentation, and here's some tests to go with it. The software developers looked at me and just thought that they looked at me in a different way, that's for sure. Cool.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Is there anything else that we want to cover today? Any last thoughts? Any last advice to the viewing audience?
My advice would be just to get cracking. And if you're the kind of person that really had an idea, or you really wanted to do something in your business or whatever it may be, then just try it. Because actually so many people now, there's this one guy called Jono in my office. He's a great guy. He flips out on me every now and again. He's a really awesome guy. And he was, if I had said to him, mate, you're gonna do some software development, he had done a number of times, thought that I was throwing him absolutely out of his depth. He'd have no chance at all. But he's one of these chaps that I just said, look, give it a go. And he's now proactively just building stuff, these internal tools that I was talking about earlier. And it's amazing. And he never thought he'd be capable of doing it. It was amazing. And now he's got someone to guide him all along the way, who, to all intents and purposes, has that 30 years of experience just sitting next to him all the time. It's absolutely amazing. So I would just say my advice would just be to get started, and you can't really go wrong. It's great.
I think for me, something that shocked me was I was coming up against a problem with Cursor quite a lot, and I actually turned to a developer and I was like, what is going on? I just can't crack this. And they immediately went to Claude and that's Claude. And I was like, this is what I've been doing. Dude, what? I want your brain. I don't want the AI. I need your brain here. Yeah, I feel like it's also becoming a resting place as well for a lot of developers that are like, I'm not sure. Ask Claude. Like,
yeah, I was just going to say, when starting out, put time into just thinking about the context and how, if there's someone that's highly driven, really intelligent, trying to map that out for them. But it also doesn't need to be perfect, because you can always go back, refine it, and as Greg was saying, sometimes you need to chunk it up, or actually you always need to, you get better results when chunking it up. Yeah, that's been my experience at least.
Maybe I'll end on a note that would have reassured me when I first tried Cursor. I heard a bunch of people muttering about how great it was, and I gave it a go. It was honestly bewildering. And I tried it for, I don't know how long, half an hour. I'm like, this is stupid. Closed it again. And then they carried on smugly describing how effective they were. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm going to have to give this another chance and try a bit harder. And so now I have crossed over to the other side. But I just wanted to reassure anyone who's tried it and given up that there is a hump to it. But once you get over it, it's not so bad.
Awesome. Well, on that note, I will say thank you very much to my lovely speakers that came on the podcast today. And yeah, thank you for watching, also, darling viewers. And if I figure out how to stop the recording, I will. But
I'm glad you didn't say start the recording, to be honest. So there we go.